but I knew that, I was just out in the middle of the universe. I knew that there were these other levels that when you die, you go further into that area. It's not just you're in the universe. And but I wasn't allowed to go there. I was just out in the middle of the universe. And it was it was the most real thing I've ever experienced in terms of being out there. And again, my brother was right there with me.
My guest today is Paula Lenz. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from Sam Houston State University. In addition to being an author, Paula's career of more than 40 years includes high school English teacher, partner in women owned businesses, national manager for a worldwide engineering firm, and executive director at a major Houston association. Paula had a spiritually transformative experience in 1983 when her brother died. He reached beyond the veil to show her that his love still exists and he still exists. Paula, thank you so much for joining us. It's an honor for me to have you as my guest.
Well, thank you so much for having me on your show.
Definitely. And you've lived a very corporate life most of your career, and you're now an author, and you have written a book about an experience or experiences that you had with your brother after he died in 1983. Can you tell us a little bit about those experiences?
Yes. And I would tell people too that this information that happened to me, this experience in 1983, this was not something I talked about back then with people. I only had one or two of my closest friends that I told about this experience that I had with my brother after his death. And, that was because I was in the business world all these years. And I didn't want people to think I was crazy and or that people just wouldn't understand. And so that was the reason I waited until after I retired, and that was 2016. And once I retired, I just said, you know what? I don't care what people think at this point. This is the truth of what happened to me, and I want to share it with people. And having been a member of International Association for Near-Death Studies, IANDS group for many years, that was helpful too, to be with that group where you can share these kinds of experiences and, you know, people believe you, they understand because a lot of them have had interesting experiences as well with loved ones who have passed on. So I'll just take you on the journey here in terms of how this all came about. But uh, really, I start my story at the point of 1982. And I was 29 years old at the time. And at that time, I still had my brother, Don, who was 4 years younger than me. And then I also have a sister who's 10 years younger. Um, but my story really begins with I began having this dream that recurred over and over again. It started in the fall of 1983. And so this dream was always the same. I was outside on these wide, expansive fields, and a large crowd was gathered there. And someone near me asked what was happening. And I replied that I heard it was the end of the world. And everyone was looking up at the sky in this dream, and there appeared Jesus. And in that moment, when Jesus appeared, I doubled down, almost falling over down to the ground. And I was experiencing at that moment the worst pain of my life. but it was not physical pain. It was heartfelt suffering and agony beyond words. And as I doubled over in this dream, I kept saying, but it isn't supposed to be this way. I thought the end of the world was supposed to be joyous. And then this dream would end. And of course, I would wake up. But I had no idea what this recurring dream meant. But remembering again, this is 1983. So fast forward now to the morning of Friday, October the 7th in 1983. And that morning, I was driving my husband to a meeting. And as I was driving, I suddenly had a very strange, sharp pain in my chest around my heart area. And I remember glancing at the car clock to determine how much time we had left to get to our meeting. And it read 9 o'clock a.m. And although I said nothing to my husband at that time, I was experiencing fear and alarm at this continued pain in my heart area. I was only 30 years old at the time, but I wondered if I could be on my way to having a heart attack or something or a blood clot. I just didn't know. But as I continued driving, eventually the pain began to fade away, but I couldn't forget about it. I was quite frightened by that episode. But after the meeting, I dropped off Michael at his office, and then I proceeded on to, this was in Houston, to the Greek festival that was going on because I was meeting a whole group of my friends there for the rest of the day. And this was this Greek festival was always held every year in Houston at the Greek Orthodox Church, the grounds there near downtown Houston. And it was a very popular and usually very crowded event. And um, my husband, Michael, at that time, he planned to join us there after lunch. But I get to the festival, and sooner than expected, I spotted Michael making his way through the throngs of people into the crowded annex. And as I smiled and waved at him as he came through the crowd, when he got closer, I saw his face. And I knew that something was terribly wrong because I'd never seen him look that way before. And when he finally reached me there in the crowd, he came up to me and put both his hands on each of my arms, and he looked me right in the eyes, and he said, Donnie was killed in an accident this morning. And his face crumpled as he spoke the words. And when I was told, I had this vision of the earth just falling, 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 and shattering at my feet. And then I just slumped down toward the ground crying, no, no, no. And my brother's fatal accident had happened while driving a company truck that morning, and his time of death was reported at 9 a.m. And this was the exact time that I had experienced the terrible pain in my heart that morning. And that day I understood what my recurring dream was conveying because it had shown me the setting that I was going to be in, which was this Greek festival and a lot of people there. And then my emotional reaction to the news of his death. And prior to that, I'd never had any precognitive dreams. But my feelings over this loss, I was completely destroyed, as was my whole family, because Donnie was just, even though he was younger than me, he was kind of the center of the family because he was a really funny guy. Um, but I didn't know that human being could cry so many tears in the coming days after his death. And In my book, I wrote, every moment was sheer agony during those days, with no words to adequately describe a broken heart. Nothing made sense, and everything about life was dark. I barely slept. I moved in a daze. I wanted to die every day. This terrible, impenetrable wall now separated me from ever having contact with my beloved brother again. How do you process that fact and integrate it into your life? I could not. And at the burial site, I wondered how I could possibly continue living after this. So I continued after that to stay in my hometown. And 3 days after the funeral, my brother Donnie came back to me while I was driving. And that Wednesday, I had driven my brother's personal truck to my grandparents' house, which was located just outside of Bryan, Texas. And I was taking several plants and vases of flowers from the funeral, taking them out to them. And this route to my grandparents' house from my dad's house took about 10 or 15 minutes. And again, I was by myself. But about halfway there, a strange thing began happening to me. I suddenly developed 360-degree vision. I could see everything in all directions as I was driving. And at that moment, I became aware of someone just behind me on my right side with his hand on my shoulder. And then I saw that it was Donnie, and I could hear him speaking to me telepathically. And Donnie's body that I was seeing was actually made up of a series of light points. It kind of reminded me of the show Star Trek, where they would beam people away and they would just turn into sparkle of lights. And that's what he looked like. But he told me not to be sad, that he was happy. And most of all, he wanted me to know what life was like for him now a little bit. And he explained to me that he was on another plane of being and that it had simply been time for him to leave. So at this point, I became aware that I was no longer in my body, but existed only in a state of consciousness. I was no longer driving at all. Instead, I saw a landscape very briefly, which I can only describe as some outlines of trees and countryside. And after that, though, my entire focus was on experiencing infinity and eternity. Throughout this entire experience, my brother stayed with me. But again, it was like I was out in the middle of the universe. But with no body restricting me any longer, I felt that I was one with the universe and that I was totally one with peace, with love, and all knowledge in the universe. And the phrase came to me of the peace that passeth understanding from the Bible. But I wasn't just thinking about peace, love, and knowledge. I had actually become all of these. And I knew that everything and everyone is one with the spirit of universal love. I knew that love is the all-encompassing, all-caring, creative element of the universe. And this is what I had become. out in the middle of space. I understood that there is no separation of anything from this all-encompassing spirit or God. All we have to do is open up to spirit, allowing the supreme consciousness and love into our own consciousness. This was the truth that I experienced out in the middle of the universe. And I loved being in this state of total consciousness, this freedom. I did not care one thing about going back to my body or my life. This was the natural state of being for me. I had no desire to do anything else except to experience more of this particular state of being. It was home to me. And although I'm certain that my brother, Donnie, communicated other information to me during this time, sadly, I cannot recall all of it. But I think that it was meant to be that way, that I was not meant to remember everything that I learned during that experience. But as I desired to be deeper into that experience, I suddenly began whooshing away very rapidly. I could hear the rushing sound. And within an instant, however, I felt my brother's hand or spirit pushing down on my shoulder area associated with my physical form. And my brother Donnie told me, no, you can't go yet. It's not your time. And then very suddenly, with a feeling of thud, I felt like I just landed back into my physical body. And I was still driving the truck. But I felt so happy for the rest of that day. And then the problem was, though, that soon after a while, I fell back into this deep grief because I missed my brother so much. But after this experience I had, my life, my consciousness, my view of life on earth was never the same. And from this experience, I derived the title of my book that I finally wrote in 2016, because Donnie was driving at the time of his accident, and I was driving his personal truck when I had my experience. I named my book that I wrote about all of this. It's called Driving into Infinity, Living with My Brother's Spirit. And some of the after effects I've had immediately following my experience, I began to hear people's thoughts sometimes. I also noticed that street lights would go out as I passed by, either in my car on the freeway or even just walking through my neighborhood in the evening. And then as soon as I would go past the street light, the light would come back on. And I learned to see people's auras. I had this particularly astonishing aura experience with a friend of mine. She worked for me, and she had come into my office. And as she's sitting there, suddenly I see this giant aura develop around her. And I'd never had that happen before, just, spontaneously seeing people's auras. But also, um, at certain times of my life, I have heard a voice giving me guidance on things. For example, um, I saved my family from dying from carbon monoxide poisoning. And that was that came about because I was guided to get up out of bed and struggle to get to the front door and open the front door and let fresh air in. I didn't know why I was supposed to do that, but I did it in the middle of the night. And I stayed there by the door with the cold, fresh air coming in. And eventually, my dad got up really early that morning and um, he discovered, he went and looked at the furnace area in his house, and he discovered that the door to the furnace had fallen off, which meant that this furnace was using up all the oxygen in the house. And if I had not been instructed somehow to go and open the door, we all would have died in that house from carbon monoxide poisoning. So just experiences like that in terms of some of the after effects. And um, again, certain times, giving me guidance. Um, I had received guidance about changing my career path at one point also. But I continued all these years to have outreach from my brother in various ways. And for example, one time when I came home from work, I came into the house, and as I walked into the living room, for an instant, I saw my brother in there. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking in the stereo cabinet. But um, also, my husband and I at that time, we had a small TV room where we would watch television, and he and I were both in there at the time. And all of a sudden, this book, we had two very tall bookcases in this little TV room. This book comes flying out from the topmost shelf and lands at our feet, right between us. And we just looked at each other like, what just happened here? Um, Also, I would come home sometimes and find this book. You could see that it had flown out of this bookcase in the hallway and had flown clear across to the other side. Um, Also, another time I came home, and when I walked into the door, when we walked into the house and started toward the bedroom area, there was a chair that had been placed right in the middle of uh, the doorway leading into the master bedroom. Well, I thought somebody was in the house, and I ran outside for a while. But I went back in, and you know, and nothing beyond that was amiss. So I just put the chair back. Um, and my dad and his wife, after my brother's death, they would hear micro their microwave buttons being pushed in the middle of the night, and that would wake them up. And my brother used to go over to their house and heat up food in their microwave. And my mother had a dream encounter with him as a deer. This deer came walking up to her in this dream, and she knew it was Donnie. And she told him, she said, "Son, you need to come back to us." And he told her, "Mama, I can't come back." And so, there have been a variety of ways that my brother has reached out to our family. But my most recent outreach from him, now I'm sitting in my home office right here. And across from this desk where I'm sitting, there's a couple of really tall bookcases. And I was in here one day, there was nobody else in the house. I was just sitting where I am now, like, right behind my desk. And again, it was very quiet. And all of a sudden, again, this book from the topmost shelf of the bookcase directly across from me came flying out. Now, it didn't come toward me, it kind of came out and went to the side. But I was right here where I am right now. And I just looked at that and I said, cut it out, Donnie. I know that's you. I mean, you sort of have to have a sense of humor about some of the stuff he pulls. But
Is it always the same book?
no, this was just some random book that came flying out of there. Um, but, you know, so he tries to show us that he's still around in various ways. Now, some people have asked me, they're like, well, do you think your brother's an earthbound ghost? And I tell them, no, absolutely not. He's just able to come in here and do this kind of stuff, and then he's back where he belongs. And that's so in keeping with my brother's personality because that's kind of the way he was. He would pull tricks on people, and he was just funny, and um, he was just a great guy. But and that sort of thing doesn't happen very often, just once in a great while. Um, but I I would also talk about at this juncture that in my book there's an afterward chapter that's been written by Dr. Jan Holden, and she's very familiar with this whole realm of this type of thing. But she cites in there that my out of body experience that I had was so much more like a near death experience because I had this empathic experience um, of my brother's afterlife, which empathic is defined as showing an ability to understand and share the feelings of another. And also, she talks about how these after effects mirrored those of as though I had had a near-death experience, according to the research. Because after that experience with my brother, I had this compulsion to just read about spiritual matters. It was like I lost a lot of interest in just reading fictional books, and then gravitation away from organized religion and more toward my understanding of life relates to a deep secular spirituality. And I don't have any fear of what we call death. And I had an increase in precognitive dreams, dreams that would tell me happenings that were coming up. I kind of had to interpret the what I was seeing in the dreams, but it would tell me a lot of times what was coming up, what something was going to happen. And I also developed electromagnetic effects from my experiences. In other words, like at night, if I walk under street lights, they go out. And then when I go past, they come back on because I'm emitting these electromagnetic, uh, you know, effects. And then I developed the ability to see auras. For example, in my book, I talk about this one friend of mine who um, she had been really sick off and on for a long time. She worked for me. And one day she came into my office, sat down, and all of a sudden I see this gigantic aura develop around her. And she, there were other people I could see that once that one happened, then I could see others, their auras. And I could tell if there were dark places in the aura that, there was some sort of illness going on. Not that I would usually tell people that. Um, but, and then I also have after all these experiences, I have this feeling of being connected to something greater than just the life that we have right here, right now. Um, But, I've reached out about sharing my story because I understand what it's like for people to lose someone they love. And it's such a horrific experience, especially if it's just something quite sudden, like the loss of our brother. One day he's there, the next day he's dead and gone. I mean, how do you deal with that? It takes a lot of time to deal with it and or get over it, I'll say. Um, but you know, all of that still brought blessings to me and put me in a whole other space with this experience, this out of body experience I had with my brother. And that's how I ended up finally. Once I retired, then that was when I sat down and wrote my book, Driving into Infinity, Living with My Brother's Spirit.
Thank you so much for writing that book because it does help others. And we've had extensive conversations, and I've lost someone as well. And it is
Yes,
hard. And to know that other people have had similar experiences, because I had spiritual experiences that I didn't know what was happening. So when we share our experiences, people can feel less alone and be confident that our loved ones still exist somewhere. That was my biggest fear, is that he didn't exist anymore, that he was just, his life was gone. And
right.
knowing that they still exist is so comforting. And I want to go back to this. I want to call it your near death experience because you're right. It was so similar to a near death experience.
Yeah.
But I'll call it an out of body experience. In that out of body experience, you were in the middle of the universe. Did you see like galaxies and colors, and did it feel more real than it is here? Tell me, like, go a little deeper into like all the little details about being there.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you have to remember too, I was it was as though I had my hand on my brother's shoulder and we were together out there in the middle of the universe, just hanging out there. And I I knew as I looked off in the distance, I knew that there were other levels, I'll say, of places that people go once you cross over, once you're deceased. Um, and I couldn't see any specifics about that, but I knew that, I was just out in the middle of the universe. I knew that there were these other levels that when you die, you go further into that area. It's not just you're in the universe. And but I wasn't allowed to go there. I was just out in the middle of the universe. And it was it was the most real thing I've ever experienced in terms of being out there. And again, my brother was right there with me. And through that experience, again, I just became one with everything, that oneness. And it's hard to describe that. I mean, the word oneness um, is kind of a difficult concept, I think, if you haven't had an experience like that. It's like you are one with everything, and I knew everything uh, about everything. It was just you're part of that complete knowledge, I'll say, um, and the complete understanding that you have when you're in that state of consciousness, I'll say. Um, and you probably know what I'm talking about when I say that. You've had that experience.
Similar, yes, similar experience.
I mean, it's just so difficult to describe, don't you think?
It is very difficult to describe. It's something you can describe as concepts, but not really as like this is a word to understand. Like here's an idea for you to think about how it was. It's kind
Right.
of more accurate. The most accurate way for me to describe it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you're doing a great job describing it, and I'm sure in your book you've done a fantastic job of describing it too. You're right. Words are just so difficult to use to express the awesomeness that these experiences contain. Um, but yeah, I mean you're doing fantastic, and I think you're really getting the message across very well.
Well, yeah, you know, when you're out of body and you're experiencing this oneness, which is the only way I know how to say it, um, it's such a different experience than just being contained in your body. It's the only way I know to say it. It's as though your body, all the outlines of your body and who you are, it's like they all disappear and you're this oneness. You experience everything that's that's out there in the universe and even beyond, I would say.
Did you feel like you dissolved out into the universe while you were still maintaining your sense of Paula?
Yes, that's a good way to try and explain it. That you you know who you are, but in those moments that you're in that state of being, in that oneness, you're realizing um, that obviously you're in a completely different state of being than you've ever known before. And even though you're still aware that you're, or at least for me, I was still aware that I had this body when I was out there in the universe, but it wasn't defining me to just the idea of my body because of this oneness that took over and just being one with everything, all knowledge, all, everything. And, but it's very difficult I think, to convey exactly how that feels. And so you just do the best that you can because it's not something you can just do automatically here. It just remains a difficult task to describe it to someone who hasn't had that kind of experience.
I
But we do the best that we can.
That's right. That's all we can do. And you were having this experience while you were driving. So you couldn't have been gone for very long because obviously you would have run off the road or into something. How long? I know that time isn't the same over there as it is over here. How long do you feel like you were gone, and how long do you feel like you were actually gone here in this physical realm?
Well, it wasn't for very long. I was, as I said, driving. I was driving on this little bypass area outside of my hometown, and and then I had to take an exit, and I got on this smaller road that was leading to my grandparents' house. And the actual time span of that occurring from when I was driving on this bypass area and then taking the exit and getting on the other road and then kind of coming back to myself while I was on the other road. I was almost to my grandparents' house. Um, it couldn't have been more than 5 minutes. I mean, and yet, um, it just felt like, well, quite frankly, there wasn't any real sense of time being out in the middle of the universe like that. I had no concept of time itself. Um, it just seemed it just seemed you're in a whole other kind of time or mindset when you're in that sort of situation. So again, I'm only guessing that it was, it was about 5 minutes. And that's not very long. And yet it felt like I was out in the middle of the universe and learning and absorbing all this knowledge and, you know, uh, and trying to figure out what's above and what's further out there that I'm seeing. It seemed like, I was gone a lot longer is the way it felt. Um, but obviously when I came back, it was just like, wow, well, I haven't been gone very long. And somehow I managed to keep driving the truck that I was driving. So uh, it's just, it's all like it's not like a dream, but it's just, wow, how did all that happen? You just, it just happened. And people can either believe it or not believe it, but that's exactly what happened. But again, I waited a long time before I wrote my book about any of that. And I just figured, well, if people don't believe me or think I'm lying or whatever, that's their problem. This is, I'm finally revealing everything. And I'm okay with that, whatever they want to think.
We're grateful. I'm very grateful that you are revealing everything because, like I said, it helps so much. And there's everybody, people are losing people every day. And though my loss was long ago and your loss was long ago, and we've learned to live differently, people are still losing people today and tomorrow and yesterday. And so these stories will help them. You mentioned that you became associated with IANDS. Tell me
Mhm.
a little bit about what you did with IANDS, and how they helped you.
Well, first of all, um, discovering IANDS was like uh, coming home to people who would understand who you are, because most of those people who are members of IANDS, they've had, different types of experiences. And whether that's out of body or, whatever kind of experience they've had. But um, there's an understanding there. You don't have to worry about what people think about what you're saying and presenting because they get it. I mean, for the most part, most of those people there have had some sort of experience. And I'm always really grateful that IANDS exists because it does enable people who've had experiences to share those experiences and to be of like mind in that and not have any fear of repercussions, I'll say, or people wanting to think you're crazy because all those people there pretty much have had, uh, different kinds of experiences and have either talked about it at the conferences, being a speaker. I was a speaker at one of the conferences. Um, and a lot of them have written books and still help other people who are going through things. So having IANDS is, wow, that's a really good thing.
And just for anyone who doesn't know, IANDS is the International Association of Near Death Studies, and they're international, of course.
Mhm.
And they have a conference. They're having a conference in 2024. I think it's on Labor Day in Phoenix, Arizona, if you want to come to that. It is a very helpful support group. You're right. It feels like coming home to people that understand, because it is so difficult to talk to people who don't understand. They haven't had any experiences, so they just, it's not their mind can't comprehend the same way that our minds can. They can try to be supportive and try to understand, but they just sometimes don't always get it, and sometimes they do. I'm not saying that 100% of the time they don't, but IANDS is a major support service available to people like you, Paula, and to anyone who's lost people or had near death experiences, or even spiritual transformative experiences, or even
Yeah,
people that are just interested in them. If you've lost a loved one or facing death or whatever it is.
yeah,
But
exactly.
yeah, I think IANDS is a godsend, and most people that have had an intense spiritual experience, whether it's near death or out of body or spiritually transformative, are somehow involved with IANDS.
Yeah, it's it is like a godsend in terms of having that group, uh, that organization, I'll say. It's not just a group, but um, because most of those people who are part of IANDS have had some sort of experience. And so they get it because they're coming from it, from that experience. And again, when you're just talking to people in general who have not had experiences like that, it's so hard to get across those feelings of how it felt to have that experience. And it's difficult when you haven't had that kind of experience. It's hard to imagine how that feels. It feels, and what that brings to your consciousness. Um, so yeah, I'm grateful to have found IANDS too a long time ago. So it was certainly good that that organization is around and still thrives.
Sure. And you have a kind of meditation that you wanted to share with us about. Tell us about the meditation, and then we can go into
Okay.
that.
Um, well, I call it the meld into spirit technique, or mist. And I created this to um, try and achieve that feeling of the oneness. And so people can find that on my website. Um, the words for that meld into spirit technique. And I was trying to see here if I've got um, so the video on the meld into spirit technique on my website is about 45 minutes long, because it goes into some other things. But there is a video clip that's the visualization for connecting with spirit through the heart. And um, so that, I've provided that there. And um, you know, one of the things about the word meld into spirit is, meld is a term that's means to absorb or to cause to become one with something. And so that's the idea behind this, achieving this melding with spirit, this technique, and where you can blend gradually and merge together with this information. Um, and it's again, it doesn't take all that long to do that, the meld into spirit technique. But there again, there's a good bit of information on my website about that. Um, but you can also do this meld into spirit technique, even if you're outside walking around, or um, even riding your bike, just opening up to the idea of being that oneness with where you are, and just letting that oneness flow through you, and be that. Um, and it's such a good break from the everyday thinking process that we're in all the time. And And that's what I love about it because, again, it's like you're pausing your normal um, self, living as this person. You're pausing that and you're taking time to let go of that humanness, I'll say, or your body, and just feel um, the spirit and uh, and just try to be the oneness with that spirit, that connection. Um, but again, you can find that meld into spirit technique on my website, paulalenz.author.com. And so I was just looking here.
And I'll link that website down below if you want to just click on that. If any of my viewers want to visit her website to get the full meditation. And there's a wealth of additional information on there as well, and how to find your book. Is your book for sale as well on the website?
Yeah, you can. I do show the book on there, and I believe you can click on it. It'll should take you, I think, to Amazon if you want to buy the book. If it doesn't link you to that, I mean, it's on Amazon where you can buy it, but it is on my website. So yeah, it's
Well,
like I said, it's a good way to get outside of your body and just into more the spiritual aspect of who we are.
is it
So
a guided meditation there on your website that's available?
yeah, um, it is on there, and um, it's available where you can listen to it on there. And again, it's just meld into spirit technique and enables you to just have a way for just a little bit to let go of uh, the body stuff and be more just the oneness of spirit around you. But um, I love that sensation. I mean, it's so good to be in a place where you feel like you're letting go of the body stuff and all the things that are happening around you, and just being that oneness.
Sounds like a beautiful experience. And if my viewers wanted to reach out to you if they have more questions, would that be okay with you?
Oh, sure. You've got an email there for me, right?
Yep, I'll drop that below as well so they
Okay.
can click on that and
Sure.
reach out to you. And do
Yeah.
you have any last words of wisdom for my viewers?
Well, I would just say uh, it's good to, as I said, just a few minutes ago, it's good to reach a point where potentially you can just sort of reach a mindset where you can just let go of everything around you, the body, uh, you know, the, the things you see right here, and just, you know, let yourself be into the universal area, and just experience that, the ability to not be the human being that you are, but rather being the spirit and connecting with spirit. That's what I would say. That's an important thing uh, to do, and that will help your feeling about who you are and what you're doing here in this universe, instead of just feeling like, well, ho hum, I'm just another human being here and struggling to do whatever. We can get trapped in those kinds of moments for sure in living our life here.
I think so for sure. Those are very wise words of wisdom. Thank you for sharing. And thank you so much, Paula, for being a guest on my show. I appreciate your time and your wisdom and your story so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me, because um, for everybody who allows this kind of sharing. It's just, more people out there who potentially are given a new way of thinking about how they can be and what they can experience while they're here. So good job on having your podcast.
Well, thank you so much, and same to you for putting your story out and making that public for people to begin to heal in your meditation and everything you have on your website.
Great. Okay.
All right,
Thank you.
Paula, you have a
Thank you.
great day.
All right. You too. Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.